We're waiting for some of our directors who are in the restroom. And to have a group of elderly males, they never get together on time. Yeah. Well, I call the meeting to order. I'm Charlie Munger, Chairman, and here are the rest of our directors. Rick Aaron, wave to them. Gary Salzman, wave again. Peter Kaufman, Gary Wilcox, and Michelle Stevens, Secretary of our meeting. Tutu is our controller, wave to them. Ellen Ireland, Inspector of Elections, will you wave? Ernest Miranda and Martin Casals of Square Miller, our accountants, will you wave? We will now proceed to the formal business of the meeting, and that will be followed by pontification and questions. If anybody has a proxy they haven't yet delivered, go ahead and do it. Ellen, will you please report the number of shares present? And that's all.
On December 22nd, 2017, the record date fixed by the Board of Directors for determining the shareholders entitled to vote today, there were 1,380,746 shares of common stock of the corporation outstanding. I have a list of the shareholders who were of record as of that date, certified by the corporation's transfer agent, Equinity Trust Company. I also have an affidavit certifying the completion of the mailing of the notice of this meeting, the proxy card, and the 2017 annual report, along with the prepaid postage return envelope to the shareholders. Proxies representing 1,283,857 shares of common stock entitled to vote at this meeting have been filed. The total number of shares represented in person or by proxy at this meeting is 1,283,857, which is more than a majority of voting power of all outstanding common stock of the corporation, and the meeting may proceed. I will attach the affidavits to the minutes of this meeting and have a copy of the minutes of the last annual meeting.
All right, the first order of business is the election of a board of directors. 5 directors are to be elected. They're the big person's name. Let's have a vote.
The nominees have received the following number of votes. Charles T. Munger, 792,490. J.P. Gehring, 768,559. Gerald L. Salzman, 794,824. Gary L. Wilcox and Peter D. Kaufman, 793,660.
No other nominations were received. The Inspector of Elections has reported, and the board has been elected. The second proposal is the ratification of the selection of our independent accountants. The audit committee has recommended that Swire Milner be reappointed, and we want the vote. We can report again.
For the auditors, 1,283,338, against 275, and abstaining 244.
That is very interesting. That's a lot of votes to vote against an auditor. Some of this stuff is really weird. Maybe they fired somebody. Doesn't like them. All right, well, the meeting is, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting. Second. Anybody? I need a second. Second. All in favor? Done. All right. Now to codification on Western. I'll first comment briefly about the general nature of the Daily Journal's traditional business. And we are surviving, but at a very modest profit. And it's quite interesting what's going on. There's a huge minefield, a not minefield, trove of valuable information buried in the court system that nobody can get out before under the computing power and procedures of your end. Of course, lawyers want to know what their judge did in all previous cases, how many cases the opposing counsel have won or lost, and so forth. So there's going to be a big business of delivering more information to people. But of course, there are a horde of people trying to get into that. Some of them are computer science types, and some are other types. And God knows how it's going to come out, but we're doing our part of that struggle. The chances that we get is come in a position as we had before when we were the only newspaper that had timely publication and scrambled all the court opinions, of course, where lawyers needed to have them, is zero. In other words, our glory days are behind us in this traditional business. And yeah, it may well survive greatly, but it's not going to be a big business. Most newspapers, by the way, I think are going to perish. Just a question of when. I mean, they're always, and there are time tools, because people will pay $5 for it in the airport. And so there'll be a few survivors, but by and large, the newspaper business is not really well. Berkshire Hathaway owns a lot of those. And buying them, we figured out a certain actual decline rate, after which the profits would go to zero. We underestimated the rate of decline. It's going faster than we thought. On the other side, we have this second business in the Daily Journal Company, which is this software business. That, of course, has taken a lot of treasure, a lot of effort to get started, but our software business now produces a lot more revenue than our traditional print business. And it's generally doing quite creditably. It's a very competitive business, and it's difficult. A lot of people in the software business don't want to deal with a bunch of government agencies. It's just too much agony. They're used to just printing money automatically for those over the ransom, and they've been building, not being overwhelmed by the money rolling in. And the way we're making money is slow and hard. It's software business, but it's a slow, hard software business. We have internal arguments about whether the first real revenue comes 4 years after the first customer contract or 7. That's the kind of business we're constantly spending money now. With somebody else cruising their terms for a long, long time. But we have a lot of difficult bureaucracy to get through in the meantime. And planning is we actually got to kind of like it. If you do it right, we of course eventually trust it. And district attorney's offices, and over the vendor offices, et cetera, and it's a real pleasure to slowly earn the trust of a bunch of customers, but doing your job right and scrambling out of your glitches as fast as you can. And I would say that business is doing well. Jerry, you would make a few comments about the new business.
Can you hear me? Yeah. The new business is slow in coming, as Charlie indicated. But the long term, once you get there, you have to understand will be quite long because the government agencies do not want to spend additional time changing software companies. It's very painful. And one of the problems is always the conversions and the interfaces. Some of our clients have upwards of 20 different interfaces and an appetite for many more because they recognize that if there's an interface, it probably saves a lot of effort. And so we have maybe 25 people, primarily based in our office in Denver, doing nothing but interfaces and conversions. And the implementation of most systems depends on the implementation of the conversions and the interfaces. That is one of the continuing headaches, because most government agencies have old systems, and it's extremely difficult to convert information that went into their system 30 years ago. That's one of the problems we face on every single installation. We have a large number of installations going on. Most will take upwards of a year, some much longer, depending on the client. And some clients have very good people that are assigned to work with us on the implementation, and other clients have upwards of 15 people. So we find that the 15 people is a great investment from the client's standpoint, because it's much faster, and they learn how to do it and make changes into the future. And that's our objective, is to have them be totally familiar with the system, and when their requirements change, they are then able to configure it, create documents in a very effective way. In contrast, historically, the government agencies would ask their IT department to do something, and it would take forever for the IT department to do it. Now it's much more efficient and very effective, and it helps the IT department feel important. And it's important for us that the IT department feel important, because then the IT staff will stick around rather than find greener pastures. And that enables us to get in and out much faster and satisfy the client.
There are two things that shareholders should know about our software business. One is that our system is more configurable than that offered by many of our competitors. That is a hugely good idea on our part. And the other thing is that we're slower to recognize revenue when somebody hires us than most of our competitors. And that is also a good thing, because if you agree to give somebody selling computer software a lot of pay for developing a system, you can spend a lot of money and get nothing back. And the buyers are very wary, and we are playing to that by one of the advantages of being very rich is that we can behave better than other people. But not only are we very rich, we don't give a damn what we report in any given quarter. And that gives us an advantage in saying to these government agencies, you're not going to take a big risk with us because you're not going to pay us until the system is working. And I think it's a very good idea that we're using conservative accounting and have that attitude toward dealing with our customers. And we want the customers to be right when they trust us. And if they're interested in the way it happens, I will confess to one thing to this group of sheriffs. I've fallen in love with the Justice Agency of South Australia. We have the contract there, and I think we trust them and they trust us. We are going to do a hell of a good job for Australia, and it gives me an enormous pleasure. So I'm biased in favor of Australia. You shareholders will just have to live with it. We may end up with pretty much all the business in Australia. If we do, it will be because we deserve it. That's our system. We're trying to preserve the business. That's the way we're trying to get it. Well, that's pretty much, it's been a long slog today. It'll be a long slog ahead. We're taking some territory, but it's not rapid, and it's never going to be the kind of thing that Google gets into. We're Microsoft. This guy just raised gold. going to be a long, long slog. But we have a big pack of money, and we have a strong will, and we have a lot of good people working in the system. And I think we'll end up slugging pretty well. Now, in addition to our businesses, we have a great bundle of securities. And I want to try and dispel for the 100th time that this is not, we do not have some minor version of Berkshire Hathaway, which has a big bundle of securities in its insurance companies, plus all the operating businesses. We have a big bundle of securities by accident, and we made a lot of money out of the foreclosure boom. And it just happened to come in about the time when the market hit a bottom. And of course, we look like a genius now. We could put the money into securities because we preferred them to hold it cash. But this is not Berkshire Hathaway, or again, this is a computer software company with a stable but small print business. And we just have a lot of extra liquidity on hand. It came to us by accident. Of course, when the money came to us by accident, we invested it as shrewdly as we could. But the chance that we will continue to gain at the rate we have in the past 4 or 5 years is zero. Now, having said that, we're going to report in the next quarter a big increase in net worth because our deferred taxes have gone down thanks to the Trump changes in the tax code. So we're going to look like a genius from another accident for one more quarter. I can comment about those securities. There's one security in there that is very interesting because BYD has gotten to be a significant position around here. And that, when Berkshire Hathaway and the Munger family went into it, was really a venture capital type play, even though it was in the public market. And BYD has developed into a huge company. It's got 250,000 employees, more or less. It has a huge electric car business. It has a small gasoline car business. It has a huge battery business. It has a huge new lithium mine coming into production, which is off the earth on there with that, but has a lake full of toxic water that if you drank it would kill you. So it's perfect for mining lithium. And the big lake, one of the biggest in the world. And so we have an interesting venture capital type business. And BYD has gone into a business they were never in before, which is monorails. And they are selling monorails like you can't believe, boomity, boomity, boom. The whole cities in China. And some even in other countries. And they're also selling those big electric buses, et cetera, et cetera. So it's weird that anybody at Berkshire or the Munger family or the Daily Journal would have anything to do with a little company in China that becomes a big company. Let it happen. And there's a varied story here that's wonderful. The man who founded BYD was like the 8th son of a peasant. And an older brother noticed that he was a genius. And under their Confucian system, the older brother just devoted his life to making sure the genius got educated. And he got to be a PhD engineer, and then he decided to go into the business of making the cell phone batteries in competition with the Japanese that had all the patents. And he got $300,000 from the Bank of China. I think his cousin of his approved the loan. Very Confucian system. And at any rate, from that tiny start, he created this enormous company, 250,000 employees. And of course, the governments of Shenzhen and this province of Quebec love BYD. It's not some partially of a joint venture. It's a Chinese company created by Chinese. It's high tech. It does wonderful things. And it hasn't disappointed anybody yet in any significant way. And so It's heartening for me to watch. Think of how hard it would be to create a big monorail business that suddenly starts to gallop. Think of how few monorails there are in the United States. But of course, the Chinese permitting system is totally different than the United States. If the Chinese want to do something, they just do it. Of course, I love that system. It's all if Jerry wants to do something, he just does it. But there are some varied stories like that. And it's a pleasure to be affiliated with people who are accomplishing a lot. And of course, it's good that you have electric buses and places that you can't breathe the air, which is a lot of places. And it's good that we have a new lithium mine up in Tibet, near Tibet, et cetera, et cetera. So there are some weirdnesses around here. I don't think we were very weird in buying into banks when they were very depressed. The Wells Fargo position is interesting. I know we'll get questions about that. So I'll answer them again in advance. Of course, Wells Fargo had incentive systems that were too strong in the wrong direction. And of course, they were too slow in reacting properly to bad news when it came. Practically everybody makes those mistakes. And I think around here we make fewer than others, but we still make them in the same direction. But I think Wells Fargo will end up better off for having made those mistakes. Any bank can make a lot of money by making a bunch of game-year loans at higher interest rates or abusing the customers with very aggressive treatments. And of course, banks really shouldn't do that. And I think as a result of all the trouble, Wells Fargo's customers are going to be better off for this event. And I think it's time for the regulators to let up on Wells Fargo. They've learned. Yeah. I can't think of anything else that deserves a lot of comment on our basic businesses. Yep. I'm looking at a bunch of shareholders that didn't really buy Daily Journal stock because of its prospect. There's one exception, big exception, but most of you are here for some other reason. You're groupies. So I know I do nerds when I see them. It's full of all ages, and all I can say is, take one to know one. Oh, I guess that's enough of it. Oh, that I might go on. One of our directors came up with a list of qualities that any investment advisor should have. And he gave it to a major picker of professional investors, and the picker immediately fired half his picks. And I thought that was such a peculiar outcome that Peter Kaufman share with you his 5 aces system for picking an investment manager. Peter, go ahead.
So I came up with this list in giving reference to a very exceptional money maker. And I not only wanted to give what I thought was a correct reference, I wanted the person that I was giving the reference to in turn be able to relate this above to the real shot caller, so that a compelling narrative would be transferred from me directly to the ultimate shot caller. So I came up with what I call the 5 aces. 5 aces being the highest hand you can have in a wild card poker. Ace number 1 is total integrity. Ace number 2 is actual deep fluency. of whatever it is you say you're going to do on behalf of the client. Case number 3 is a fee structure that is actually fair in both directions. Case number 4 is an uncrowded investment space. And ace number 5 is a long runway, meaning that the manager is reasonably young in age. I further add that if you ever find a money manager who possesses all 5 of these characteristics, there are 2 things you should do. 1, you should put money with them immediately. And number 2, put as much money as you are allowed to put. Now, I know we have money managers in the room, and we have...
Do we ever?
And we have people who employ money managers who are in the room. If you employ money managers, this is an excellent formula to evaluate your money managers.
Yeah, but it'll cost you to fire half of those you hire. You have hired.
But perhaps more importantly, if you're a money manager, this should be your list of 5 aspirations. What characteristics should I seek as a money manager to possess? I should be completely trustworthy. I should have actual deep fluency in what I claim that I'm going to do. I should adopt a fee structure that's genuinely fair in both directions. I should seek an uncrowded space because, as we all know, in business where there's mystery, there's margin. What kind of margin are you going to have in a crowded space? And number 5, many of you in here, you're very fortunate. You get to check that box for having a long runway. Some of the best money managers in history only get 4 out of these 5 aces because they don't qualify for number 5.
Those include those you're invested with. We do not have a long runway. That doesn't mean companies do well, but in terms of investment management runway, it's rather interesting. Berkshire Hathaway is peculiar in that its directors are so old and its managers are so old. I mean, the only institution that exceeds Berkshire Hathaway in the Daily Journal in terms of old directors and officers is the Mormon Church. The Mormon Church is run by a group of people, and they have 2 wonderful qualities. There's no paid clergy in the Mormon Church. And the ruling powers and a group of males between about 85 and 100. And that system is more successful than any other church. No paid clergy and very old males. Obviously, we are copying that system. And we are so much older than the Berkshire directors, who are also very old. One says we're always shagging to see how the young fellows are doing. The Daily Journal looks at Berkshire. It is slightly weird, but the world is, who would guess that the church was the best record for keeping people happy and so on and so on, and something little and that, which is the Mormon Church. Who would guess that it had no paid clergy, was run only by males who were about 85 and up? Now that is a very odd result. And I guess I should like odd results, because I'm sure I'm living a life with a lot of odd results. I'm very surprised to be here. Somebody said, an old woman whom I liked said at her 94th birthday party, she says, I'm very pleased to be here. In fact, she said, I'm very pleased to be anywhere. Well, that's what it is. the incentive structure in investment management is very interesting. If you look at the people who have a ton of money from the past, let's say the Massachusetts Investor Trust or something like that, which pioneered mutual fund investing in the early days after mutual funds were allowed, was certainly a respectable and honorable place. But once it gets to be $700 billion or whatever it is, hires a lot of young men, has a big staff, and so forth, young women too. And its chances and spreads the securities over, its investments over 50 securities at least, the chances that it's going to outperform the S&P average really shrinks to about zero. And of course, they wonder where we will keep paying whatever number of basis points Massachusetts Investors Trust management operation charges for the long term, and they feel under pressure, and their world is threatened. And another place is threatened. Suppose you're charging, say, 1 and 20, 1% off the top and 20% of profits, or even worse, 2% off the top and 20% of profits, and you've got 30 billion or so under management, an army of young, ambitious people, all of whom want to get unreasonably rich very fast. What are your chances of doing better for your clients? Well, the average entity that charges those fees, the chances the clients will do well are pretty poor. That's the reason more on that bet against the hedge funds. We bet on the S&P averages, and they bet on carefully selected bunch of geniuses charging very high fees. And of course, the high fees will just kill you. It's so hard in a competitive world to get big advantages just by buying securities, particularly when you're doing it by the billion. And then you add the burden of very high fees and think that by working hard and doing a lot of sell-side research and so forth, you're going to do well. It's delusional. It's not good to face the world in a delusional way. And I don't think when Berkshire came up, we had an easier world than you people are facing from this point forward. And I don't think you're going to get the kind of results we got by just doing what we did. That's not to say that what we did and the attitudes that we had are obsolete or won't be useful. It's just that their prospects are worse. There's a rule of fishing that's a very good rule. And the first rule of fishing is fish where the fish are. And the second rule of fishing is don't forget the first rule. And investing is the same thing. And some places have lots of fish, and you don't have to be that good a fisherman to do pretty well. Other places are so heavily fished that no matter how good a fisherman you aren't going to do very well. And in the world we're living in now, an awful lot of places are in the second category. And I don't think that should discourage anyone. I mean, life's a long game, and there are easy stretches and hard stretches, and good opportunities and bad opportunities. And the right way to go with life is to take it as it comes and to do the best you can. And if you live to an old age, you'll get your share of good opportunities. Now, there may be 2 to a lifetime, that may be your full share. But if you seize one of the 2, you'll be all right. So with that modification, I'm going to take questions. Go ahead. Wait for a mic. We don't have mics here.
Ellen, do you have a question? I had a question.
I'll point.
Hi, Mr. Munger. My name is Max Fleur from Yakima, Washington. Thanks for having us here, and happy Valentine's Day to you. And to everyone else. My question is about Midwestern values. how you define them, how they influenced you, and how much they're embedded into the DNA of Berkshire.
Well, I think there is some Midwestern values embedded in Berkshire. I don't think it would be the same place if it had grown up in the middle of Manhattan Island. There's just so much buzz and craziness and plan in a place like Manhattan that I think it was actually an advantage for Warren to be running that place out of Omaha. And certainly I have a deep ties of affection and respect for my life in Omaha and my parents and their friends. And so I like what I think of as Midwestern culture. And I really don't like crazy culture. And there's a lot of it in a lot of places. So, yeah, I feel guilty for what we do. I don't think it's that bad in the south or the east or the Rocky Mountains. But I have less experience with that culture. And I go to Montana to fly fish. And I like Montana when I'm there. But that's too rugged for me. I like more intellectualism in a bigger city. So Omaha was just right for me. Some other questions?
Good morning, thank you. My name is Will Contis. I'm a groupie from Philadelphia. And my question, Mr. Munger, as it relates to BYD, given that you've successfully invested in commodities in the past, how do you view investing in things such as cobalt, lithium, and helium as technologies of the future? Thank you.
Well, I'm hardly an expert in commodity investing, but certainly cobalt is a very interesting metal, and it's up about 100% from the bottom, and it could get tighter, but that's not my game. I don't know much about that. I haven't invested in metals in my life much. I think I bought copper once for a few $1,000s. I think that's my only experience.
Mr. Munger, Jason from San Francisco. When I reflect on where I am here in my 30s, I often think about the multiple tuck-ins that newer gentlemen who are my age and the imagery facing the streets of Pasadena shoulder your multiple reefs alone. In contrast to that, could you tell us about some of the people and experiences that helped you through that period? And my friend also has a completely different question.
Hi, Latif from Studio City. I didn't know he was going to do that, but Mr. Munger, I produce comedy shows, and I was just wondering, did you ever have any aspirations to be a comedian? Because your jokes per minute are off the charts.
Well, I think you understand me best. I'm really what I call a Gentile Jew. You know, if you look at the way the world is organized, about 2% of the people provide about 60% of the humor. Really. And this is weird, because this is a group that's had a lot of trouble. So, I just like the Jews, I like the humor. It's my way of coping. And by the way, I recommend it to all of you. I might tell a story. How do you figure it? We don't know. But the darling little girl, wispy, blonde hair, beautiful girls, charming lips, goes into the pet store. Pet store owner said, "Oh, you darling little blonde-haired girl, what can we do for you?" Says, "Wabbits. I want wabbits." "Oh, we got wonderful wabbits." gray wabbits, white wabbits, brown wabbits. What kind of wabbits do you want? And she said, I don't think my lovely big snake is gonna give a shit. It does help to go through life with a little humor. One thing that's nice about the human condition is people are always doing these utterly ridiculous things. And you don't lack for new things to crack jokes about. Other questions?
Hello, Mr. Munger. My name is Richard Lewis from Culver City. And I have a question about the talk you did back in 1995 at Harvard on the standard causes of human misjudgment. And I thought you ended it in a very interesting way, where you said, I don't think it's good teaching psychology to the masses. In fact, I think it's terrible. Would you elaborate on that comment?
Well, it sounds as though I'm somewhat misquoted. I do think it's hard to teach the full reach of psychology the way they do it in academia. Because the way they do it in academia is they want to do experiments, and they want to learn things from the experiments that can publish. Therefore, the experiments have to be pretty simple. They're testing one particular triggering factor if they can. And by doing that over a vast number of triggering factors, they accumulate a big body of experimental evidence, and you can drag some general principles out of it. But the great utility of psychology is when you know those principles as fluently as you know how to read something, really fluently, and you use those principles in synthesis with the rest of knowledge. The interplay of psychology with the rest of knowledge is a vastly productive area for correct thinking. But the psychology professors can't do it because they don't know the rest of knowledge. And there's no reward in psychology for synthesizing the rest of knowledge with psychology. The rewards are for doing another experiment and publishing. And so it's mistaught. It's a subject that intrinsically works best when you use it in combination with some other discipline. But academia is not set up for people to get good at using a blend of two disciplines. So the whole damn system is wrong. On the other hand, that gave great opportunity to me because I always figured when I was young that if my professor didn't know what I didn't matter, I figured out for myself. I could tell from the first instant that the big territory was synthesizing psychology with the rest of knowledge, and so I learned psychology so I could do it. The psychology professors, they just try and learn it the way it's taught. There's no reward if you're a professor of psychology for synthesizing psychology with the rest of knowledge. Now, you people should follow my example, not the example of the psychology professor. I guarantee you that you won't make any money doing it their way. Occasionally, you find a group like Thaler's group. Thaler just won the Nobel Prize, by the way. And he's trying to synthesize this process. And I say more power to Thaler. Make his tribe increase. And it's a good sign that the world was given to Thaler a Nobel Prize. He's doing exactly what I'm recommending. Another question? Who else can I have there? Oh, okay.
Go ahead. Hi, I'm Eva Mackey from London. Speaking of the Munger system, if you had to teach the Munger system of mental
Put the
models,
microphone closer to your mouth.
if you had to teach, hi, I'm Eva Mackey from London. if you had to teach the Monk system of mental models to primary children, how would you focus on covering all the models, or would you focus on teaching them how to figure it out themselves?
Well, I'm not catching it exactly.
What children?
Take it slowly with the microphone closer to your mouth.
If you had to teach the Monk system of mental models to primary children, would you focus on covering all the models, or would you focus on teaching them how to figure it out themselves?
Well, I do both. Of course, if you get the right number of models in your head, it helps. And of course, you want to get fluency in using the models. And there isn't any road to getting it done fast. At least if there is, I've never found it. You can keep at it. But that's my system. My whole system of mine is keeping at it. I'm a big admirer of Carlyle's approach, which was quoted all the time when everybody knows where how they regard his position. Carlyle says the task of man is not to see the light dimly in the distance, but to do the task that's clearly at hand. And I think that's right. I think that most of the time you should get the work that's before you're done and just let the future fall as it will.
Sure. Stand.
Hi, Charlie.
Yeah.
Paul Smith from Los Altos. A privilege to be here with you. My question is concerning commercial banks. Obviously, Berkshire has a very large, I think, $60 billion portfolio there. Daily Journal has a sizable one. My question is, as I look at that portfolio, especially the Berkshire portfolio, there are quite a few banks that appear to be at or close to the quality of what's in that portfolio, some of which I think people like you think highly of. My question is, I realize they're fairly fully valued now, but maybe 4 or 5 years ago when they weren't. Why aren't there more of those high-quality banks in the Berkshire portfolio? Is it just concentration of the portfolio? 60 billion is a lot. Or is there some pattern among those banks that make them less attractive to you and Mr. Buffett? Thank you.
Well, banking is a very peculiar business. The temptations to come to a banking CEO are way, the temptations to do something stupid are way greater in banking than they are in most businesses. Therefore, it's a dangerous place to invest because there are a lot of ways in banking to make the near-term future look good by taking risks you really shouldn't take with respect to the long-term future. And so banking is a dangerous place to invest, and there are a few exceptions. And Berkshire has tried to be in the exception as best as could. And I haven't any more to say on that subject except that I'm sure I'm right.
Morning, Charlie. Morning, Charlie.
Good morning.
My name is Frank Wing. I'm from Houston. My question is your thoughts on the valuation of software companies like Apple, Facebook, Google, Amazon, Alibaba. Are they overvalued, potentially undervalued? Too early to tell?
Well, my answer is I don't know. Next question.
Good morning. Actually, I have a question for Mr. Kaufman, and if Mr. Uncle would like to comment, I would certainly appreciate that too. So, Mr. Kaufman, you mentioned about the 5 aces, and one of them is aligning the interest with the investor with the right fee structure that benefit both. My question is, for what have you seen that actually, good fee structure that benefit both from like a startup fund, let's say $50 million asset, and then the large fund with long
Charlie answer that because he can describe to you what he thinks is the most fair fee formula that ever existed, and that's the formula in Warren Buffett's original partnership.
Yeah, Buffett copied that from Graham. And Mohnish, Pabrai is probably here. Mohnish here. Wait, stand up and wave to them, Mohnish. This man uses the Buffett formula, and always has. He just copies it. And Mohnish has just completed 10 years. And he was making up for high water mark. So he took nothing off the top at all for 10 years. He sucked his living out of his own capital for 10 long years, because that's what a good money manager would be cheerfully willing to do. But there aren't many Mohnishes. Everybody else wants to scrape it off the top and go. And it's a wrong system. Why shouldn't a man who has to manage your money, he's 40 years old, and he's already rich? Why would you want to give your money to somebody who hadn't accumulated it? And by the time he was 40. And if he has some money, why shouldn't he, on the downside, suffer right along with you, the investor? Yeah. I'm not talking about the employees under the top manager, but I like the Buffett formula. And here it is, it's had these huge successes. And huge as the Buffett career. Who is copying the Buffett formula? Well, we've got Mohnish. And maybe there are a few others probably in the room. But everybody wants to scrape it off the top. Because that's what everybody really needs, is to check every month. That's what is comforting in human nature. And of course, half the population, that's all they have. They're living from paycheck to paycheck. And so, Buffett's formula was he took 25% of the profits, over 6% per annum, with a high water mark. And so, if the investor didn't get 6%, Buffett would get nothing. And that's Mohnish's system. And I like that system, but it's like many things that I like and think should spread. But you get like almost no success in spreading that system. It's too hard. The people who are capable of attracting money on more lenient terms, it just seems too hard, I think. If it were easier, I think there'd be more copying of the system. But we still got Mohnish.
Mr. Munger, why have you chosen to have your friends call you Charlie Munger when you could have instead chosen to go by Chuck Munger?
The only people who call me Chuck call me blind on the telephone and ask me to invest in an oil place. No, I don't mind being called Charlie. My grandfather was Charlie Munger. When he got appointed a federal judge, he thought it was undignified to be a Charlie. So he reversed his initials and he was P.C. Munger instead of C.P. But I didn't follow my grandfather's practice. I'm quite willing to have an undignified name.
I'm Munger.
Yeah.
Patrick Jangosin from New York. Two questions, if I may. Can you give more detail around the Berkshire, JP Morgan, Amazon healthcare partnership, and why in the initial press release it said that the model would be spread beyond the employees of the three companies, but then the Wall Street Journal reported that Jimmy Dimon started receiving phone calls from upset healthcare CEOs, and he said the model would only be for the employees of the three companies. My second question is, can you give your view of what is Lilu's talent? Thank you.
Well, those are two unrelated questions, but there's no rule against it. If three or too much, just for the record. On the healthcare system, the existing system runs out of control on the cost side, and it causes a lot of behavior, which is, it's not only regrettable, it's evil. There's a lot of totally unnecessary crapola that's crept into the medical system so that people can make more money. And the costs are just running completely out of control. And other people have systems that have better statistics that cost maybe a fifth as much. If you talk about Singapore, or half as much. You talk about some very level European country. So they're just concerned about something that's run out of control because the incentives are wrong. And they want to study it and do something for the three companies. And of course, that's a very difficult thing to take on. I don't know how it will work out. The man in America who thinks about these subjects in a way that I much admire is he'll go on to use a professor of medicine at Harvard. And he's not only the best writer that I know of in the whole medical profession, he's also a very honorable and very clear-thinking man. And he's thinking in the right. So both his parents were physicians. This is a man that can check all the boxes. And so there's a lot wrong, and these people are looking at it to see if they can do something. They're going to find it plenty difficult. It wouldn't be hard if you were benign desperate to do something pretty dramatic. Take macular degeneration of the eye. Old people who have it, which is a lot, need a shot on regular. Well, I can get that damn shot. It's not that hard to shoot a little duke into an eyeball if you know how to do it. And it draws a lot of pay. And there are two different substances you use, and one of them costs a fortune and the other costs practically nothing. They both work about equally well. And of course, what's really being used a lot in America is the more expensive of the two substances. There's a lot wrong with that situation. And it's just crept in a lot of unnecessary costs. And medicines, all that kind of stuff. And many a man who's dying is like a carcass in the plains of Africa. In come all the vultures and jackals and hyenas and so on. And a dying old person in many an American hospital looks just like a carcass in Africa. The carnivores come in to feed. It's not right to bleed so much money out of our dying people. And there's not a hospital in America that doesn't have people lying in a dialysis ward have no chance of waking up. They're being dialyzed to death. Deeply immoral, stupid conduct. So to the extent that somebody makes some assault on some of these amenity of our present healthcare system, I'm all for it. On the other hand, I'm glad I'm not doing it. It's really difficult. I'm too old for that one. But if I welcome somebody who's trying to. It's deeply wrong what's happening. It's deeply wrong. And some stuff is not getting done that is very cost effective, and a lot of totally unnecessary stuff to be done. Why shouldn't we do that? So I'm all for somebody trying to figure it out. But if they ask me to serve on such a panel, I decline. It's really hard going, and you're stepping on a lot of evidence. Oh, the second question was Lilu. What's so unusual about Lilu? Lilu is one of the most successful investors you can imagine. And he just popped out of somebody's womb, and he just assaulted life as best he could, and he just ended up pretty good at it. But he was very good at it. He's ferociously smart and really helpfully intelligent. He's very energetic. That also helps, and he has a good temperament. And he's very aggressive. He's willing to patiently wait and then aggressively pounce. Very desirable temperament to have. If the reverse comes, he takes it well. Also a good quality to have. So it's not very hard to figure out what works, but there aren't that many leaders. You know, in my life, I've given money to one outside manager, and that's Lilu. No others in my whole life. And I have no feeling that it would be easy for me to find a second. It's not that there aren't others out there. It's just they're hard to find. Doesn't help you if somebody's, the stock is a wonderful thing to buy if you can't figure it out. Yeah. Somebody else.
My name is Vishal. In the past, and my question is really around brands. In the past, you've talked about buying a business with a durable competitive advantage. You have talked at length about the value of great brands with pricing power. Currently, big consumer brands are losing their cachet with younger consumers. New emerging brands that started online. Private label products like Kirkland Signature are getting better by the day. And in turn, big consumer brands are losing sales and pricing power. In a world where the durable advantage seems to be acquired through scale, like Amazon and Costco, has your view on the big consumer brand modes changed?
Well, the big consumer brands are still very valuable, but they had an easier time in the former era than they're going to have in the future era. So you're right about that. And of course, Amazon I don't know that much about, except that it's unbelievably aggressive. And the man ahead of this purposely smart. On the other hand, he's trying to do things that are difficult. Costco I know a lot about because I've been a director for about 20 years. And I think Costco will continue to flourish, and it's a damn miracle the way the Kirkley brand keeps getting more and more accepted. You're right about that. So you're right, it's going to be harder for the big brands, but they're still quite valuable. If you could have owned, say, the Snickers bar, trademarks and so forth, it'll still be a good asset 60 years from now. It may not be quite as good for the owner as it was in the last 60 years, but it doesn't have to be. Yeah. But it makes it harder for you investors. You know, it used to be just the groupies would buy Nestle and they'd think, well, I just sit on my tail with Nestle. I don't think it's quite that simple anymore. It's harder. You're right. But you know that. That wasn't really a question. You didn't want me to agree with him. That's what everybody likes. You want the answering voice to agree with us. Yeah.
Good morning, Mr. Mohnish. My name is Theodore Frey. Good morning, Mr. Mohnish. My name is Theodore Frey. My question is, you once said in an interview that you prefer that the U.S. would import the oil instead of getting it out of the ground. Where I come from, which is the Middle East, Kuwait, oil represents around 85 to 90% of the government's revenues. Basically, my question is, what do you think is the future for oil?
The future for oil? The future of oil was the future of Kuwait.
No, future of oil. Future of oil. What do you think is there going to be any substitute to the commodity? Or?
Well, I said last year that oil was very interesting, and the great companies like Exxon were producing about a third as much as they used to at the peak, and yet they're still very prosperous because the price of oil has gone up faster than production has gone down. But it's a weird subject, you know, what's going to happen with oil. Eventually, it's going to get very hard to have more oil, and eventually the price will go very high. As a chemical feedstock, it's totally essential to the hydrocarbons, and so it's never going to go out of vogue, and of course we're going to need it for energy for a long, long time ahead. But as an investment, I think it's a difficult subject, and I think you'll notice that Berkshire in its whole history has had very few investments. You know, some, but not that many. And the Daily Journal doesn't have any. It's a tough subject, and of course, as I said here last year, I think the correct policy of the United States would be not to produce our oil so fast. I think oil is so precious and so desirable over the long pole that I'd be very happy to have more of our oil just stay in the ground and just pay up front to the Arabs to use up theirs. I think that would be the great policy of the United States. Only 99.9% of the rest of the people in the world are against me. But why would we want to use up all our oil as fast as we can? Why would that be smart? Do we want to use up the topsoil of Iowa as fast as we can? I don't think so. So I think our current policies are totally nutty. And if you go on, when I was young, there were about 2 million, I forget. It was 2 billion bushels of corn. The whole production of the country, there were about 6 times as many bushels of corn. And a big chunk of that corn is being turned into motor fuel. That is an utterly insane policy. It happens because of the political power of the farm states and our weird system. And there's nothing to be done with using of our topsoil to create corn that we turn into motor fuel. It's really dumb. And yet it's there. Nobody has any power of changing it. It's weird. So the whole oil subject is weird. It's weird that companies prosper by producing less and less of their main product in physical terms. And it's weird that a whole nation would do something as dumb as turn a big percentage of the corn crop into motor fuel by edict of the government. So it's a weird subject. It's a weird, but the oil is totally essential, and the hydrocarbons. And without the hydrocarbons, our great topsoil doesn't work very well. The miracle grains are miracles if you use a lot of hydrocarbons, plus our good soil. The miracle grains don't work very well without the hydrocarbons. It's so weird. The current population of the earth is being fed by miracle grains, and their miracle is they turn oil into food. So you raised a weird subject. You must like weird subjects. Somebody else.
Hi, Charlie. Bill Morgan from Los Angeles. Thank you. I have a question. Some of the greatest advancements to humanity seem to be the result of public-private partnerships, the railroad, electrification, the technology revolution. Now, all of those require some measure of rationality and foresight among politicians and business leaders. And I don't know, that doesn't seem to be as much supply at the moment. But do you see any opportunities today in terms of possibilities for partnering or infrastructure or basic research or that sort of thing?
Well, the answer is yes. I think one of the obvious needs is a really big national grid, which takes new federal legislation and a lot of other things. I think it will come. We should have it already. It's a failure of government that we don't have a wonderful electric grid. But it will come, and I think Berkshire Hathaway will be a big part of it when it happens. But it's easy to overestimate the potential. Why don't we have a big electric grid that works already? And there are a lot of things that should happen but don't happen, or happen very slowly. I don't think calling it a public-private partnership sounds wonderful. Everybody wants what my friend Peter Kaufman calls a robust narrative. That's what people specialize in America. Robust narrative. Public-private partnership sounds like a robust narrative. It sounds to me like a bunch of thieving bankers will get together with a bunch of thieving consultants. It's a robust narrative.
Aaron Mockta from California. You once said when you acquire a company, your time horizon is typically forever. That being said, what did you recognize about General Electric for that you want to get out and what looked like you got out at the right time?
Well, we made an investment in General Electric in the middle of a panic because it was a decent buy as a security to be passively held. And it worked out for us fine. General Electric, of course, is a very complicated and interesting subject. It is interesting that a company so well regarded for acumen, education, technology, et cetera, should end up so ill regarded as a result of a long period of subpar performance. People didn't expect it. And of course, people are saying, what caused the failure of performance at General Electric? My answer would be partly life is hard and there's some accident in the world. And that's part of it. And part of it, I would say that the system at General Electric, where you rotate executives through different assignments as though there are so many Army officers building up a resume to see whether they can be promoted to be generals. I don't think that works as well as keeping people in one business for a long time and having them identify with the business the way Berkshire does. And so I would say to some extent what has happened indicates that maybe there should be a little less of this corporate management in the style of the U.S. Army. And maybe people should actually do a little more of the Berkshire style, where by and large people spend their whole careers in one business.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Munger. Alan Glenn, Fairfax, Virginia. You've served for many decades on a variety of boards, including the for-profit sector, Berkshire and Wesco and Daily Journal, and also the nonprofit sector. Could you give us any lessons you've learned for serving on a board and touch on also the criteria you consider for hiring and when removing, when necessary, executives? Thank you.
Well, I don't think I can do that in one short burst of pomposity. So, each situation is different. Yeah. But I will say this, that if you ask people with long experience in management what their mistakes were looking backward, the standard response is somebody who should have been removed wasn't for way too long. So I think that general lesson is true practically everywhere and in all contexts. But beyond that, I don't think it's too broad a question. Yeah.
Howard Winston, San Marco. Are you concerned at all about the rising level of government debt to GDP at the same time that we're running large deficits late in the economic cycle?
Of course I'm concerned about the rising level of government debt. This is new territory for us, and new territory probably has some danger in it. On the other hand, it is possible that the world will function more or less pretty well, even with a very different pattern of government behavior than you and I would have considered responsible based on history to date. Of course, if you look at the inflation we got over the last 100 years, when the announced objective of government was to keep prices stable. Now the announced objective is 2% inflation. What the hell's going to happen? Well, the answer is we don't know. But isn't the way to bet that it's going to be inflation over a long term that's way higher than 2%? I think the answer is yes. But I think that we have learned from what has happened in the past that macroeconomics is a very peculiar subject, and it doesn't work like physics. The system is different in one decade from the system that was present in the last decade, and different systems have different formulas. And they don't tell you when the system has changed and when the formulas have to change. So I don't expect the world to go totally to hell. because, well, look at what happened in Germany after World War I. They had a hyperinflation when the currency basically went to zero in value. They really screwed up big time. And what happened? Well, what happened is that it exacerbated it when the Great Depression. What happened was they recovered from it pretty well. And they did it by creating a new Reichsmark backed by the mortgages, which they put back on the houses and properties of the people who had unfairly gotten rid of their mortgages at no cost. And that new Reichsmark was working pretty well, and Germany had pretty well recovered from that catastrophe. And then along came the Great Depression. And the combination of the Great Depression and the Weimar inflation really brought in Hitler. Without the Great Depression, I don't think he would have come into it. And what happened? Now you've got, and by the late 30s, what was the leading economic power in Europe? It was Germany. Because Hitler, in his crazy desire for vengeance and so on, bought a lot of munitions and trained a lot of soldiers and so forth. And the accidental Keynesianism of Germany under Hitler caused this vast prosperity. So Germany was the most prosperous place in Europe in 1939. So all that catastrophe, they recovered from it. So I don't think you should be too discouraged by the idea that the world might have some convulsions. There's a way of recovering. Now, I'm not advocating the German system. But I do think knowing these historical examples creates what I call mental poise. When you think that the country that destroyed its own silly war, destruction of your own currency, Great Depression, by 1939 it's the most prosperous country in Europe. It's encouraging. I hope you feel better. Some other question.
Thank you for taking my question. So my question is, since the mid-1990s, the number of Department of Justice cases filed annually under the Sherman Act has collapsed from 20 to almost 0. Over the same period, we've seen a dramatic increase in the winner-take-all effect, where market share of the top 5 companies across almost all industries has surged, not just technology and media. And the number of publicly traded companies has dropped close to 50%. So, for example, from 8,100 to 4,300. Why do you think the Department of Justice has been less active in enforcing antitrust legislation over the past 20 plus years? And do you think the DOJ is likely to become more active? And how do you think that will affect the financial markets?
Well, I don't know whether the Department of Justice is going to become more active or not. I am not terribly disturbed by the present state of the economy or the present state of concentration of economic power. Wherever I see companies' founders are having plenty of competition. And so I'm not a calamity howler on the theory that the whole world is wrong in its present economy. There are companies now that people are worried about they're being too powerful, like Kodak, and not even hear anything. And I think we have enough competition by and large. I do not think the world is going to hell from lack of activity in the Justice Department.
Stephen Chen from Canada. Mr. Munger, thank you for sharing your wisdom with us. I am an actuary, and I'm always curious about Berkshire reinsurance operation. How did JM build Berkshire reinsurance from scratch? And if you could share some insights, that would be really appreciated.
Well, it was very simple. He worked about 90 hours a week. He was very smart. He's very honorable. He's very pleasant to deal with. And he talked every night to Warren Buffett. You could just find somebody else like that. He won't do as well because the game is harder now than it was then. And that's my answer to your question.
Hi, Charlie. Like he was named after my grandfather. His name was Warren Robinson. And that's my name.
I had a question though regarding Warren Buffett. In 2008, he wrote an op-ed article regarding the depths of the bear market, talking about how he had previously been with his own money in treasuries. And because in my mind, he's normally thought of as a buy and hold investor, but in this case, a lot of his money, almost all of it, was in treasuries. And I wanted you to speak to the, if you could, to the value of holding money in a portfolio at the proper time.
Well, it's possible that there could be a time when a wise investor would be all in treasuries. That is not impossible, but it's virtually impossible for me. I can imagine such a world, but I don't think, I haven't been in that kind of world yet. So, I think generally speaking, long-term treasuries are losing debt over the long term. And that's my view.
Mr. Munger?
Yeah.
In 1999, Warren Buffett said that he could return 50% if he ran $1 million. Given what you said about the investment landscape today being more difficult, what do you think that number would be today? Thank you.
Well, I do think that a very smart man who's patient and aggressive in combination is willing to work hard and root around in untraveled places like thinly traded stocks and other odd places. I do think a person with a lot of shrewdness working with a small amount of capital can probably earn high returns on capital even today. However, that is not my personal problem at the moment. And for me, it's harder. And for Berkshire, it's harder. And for the Daily Journal, we don't have any sense either. It's disadvantageous to have securities in a corporate vehicle like the Daily Journal Corporation. It's an accident we have them there. We have them there because that's where the money was. But it wasn't. The way it's worked out, it's not desirable if you're a shareholder to have a layer of corporate taxes to be you and your securities indirectly owned. And once you get current public securities held in a public corporation, taxable under Subchapter C of the Internal Revenue Code, all kinds of factors, including income taxes, affect your investment decisions. And it's much easier to invest a charitable endowment under your personal pension. So, generally speaking, well, I would say if you're shrewd enough, making a small sums of money, I think you can compound very well. The minute you get bigger sums, I think it starts getting difficult. And it's way more difficult for all of you people sitting here than it was for me when I was in your position. But I'm about to die, and you have a lot of years ahead. You don't want to trade your position for mine.
My name is Vishal. I come from India. The friend who asked me to come here actually said that Mr. Munger is not getting any younger, but I think he was wrong. I see you. So thanks for the opportunity. My question is that I am a teacher of value investing back in India. I'm also a parent. So my question is, what would you advise me as a teacher and as a parent to help my kids and help my students become better thinkers and decision makers and also be happy in life? Thank you.
I did not pick that up. You were trying to help me by hurrying up. That's not the best system. Repeat it, please. Well, that's a wonderful question. And I would say, look, the minute you have the attitude you already expressed, you're probably going to win at everything you want to win at. You just keep trying to live a good life and a constructive life, and to be rational and to be honorable and to meet the reasonable expectations of people who depend on you. Of course, you're going to get ahead over time. And of course, the best way to teach is by example. And of course, example works better when you win, and if you behave right, you're more likely to win. So I would say you're on the right track already. All you have to do is keep at it. With your attitude, you can't fail.
Good morning, Mr. Buffett, Mr. Munger.
Well, I'm flattered to be called Mr. Buffett.
In the most recent annual report for Berkshire, as in the past reports, the growth in book value was shown, and over the past 52 years, it's grown from $19 to $172,000, which represents a return of 19% a year. Is in large part that outsized percentage attributable to the leverage inherent in the insurance company, such that you can own an investment in the insurance company which returns, say, 14%, and it becomes 20% of book value?
Well, obviously there was a little leverage buried in the Berkshire numbers. Obviously the insurance business provided some of that. It's not overwhelming in its consequences. There were years when it was so big. There were years when Ajit made so much money it was almost embarrassing. And then he gave money to Warren, and Warren was like 20% on the money. So there were some years when some remarkable synergies between the insurance business and the rest of Berkshire happened. But basically, the insurance business is not some same easy way to make money. There's a lot of danger and trouble with the insurance business, and it's more and more competitive all the time now as we're sitting here. So, Berkshire succeeded because there were very few big errors. There were like no big errors, really, really big. And there were a considerable number of successes, all of which would have been much harder to get under present conditions than they were at the time when we got the results. And there are very few companies that have compounded at 90% per annum for 50 years. It's a weird in net worth. That is very peculiar. I wouldn't count on that happening again soon. Certainly won't happen at the Daily Journal.
This question is for Mr. Munger and Rick Guerin. This is a question about margin trading. With the recent decline in the U.S. stock market recently, there's a lot of margin calls to customers. I know back in your partnership days, back in 73, 74, there was a big bear market and a lot of declines in your portfolio. Would you care to comment on the productivity of margin trading?
Well, of course it's dangerous when you have a margin account because the person who's giving you credit can wipe you out at the bottom tick just because he feels nervous. And therefore, of course, people like Berkshire are totally avoid any position where anybody else would start selling our securities because he feels nervous. And of course, there are a lot of people now that are pushing margin trading very, very hard. And of course that will, then you've got weird new instruments like these fixed contracts that trigger new selling because existing selling happens. So you get a feedback effect that where a little decline becomes a big one, and then a big one becomes a bigger one, and so on. And it rapidly goes down a lot in a short time. I'm afraid that under modern conditions, the risk of what happened recently with the VIX is it's just part of the modern conditions. Yeah. Of course, we'll always have margin traders who want to push life hard. We'll always have catastrophe. Niederhofer was just wiped out by the victim. It's the second time he's been wiped out. Yeah, he's a very talented man. Niederhofer was famous at Harvard. His name became a verb. He learned what was called the Niederhofer, the curriculum. He was a great card player and a great squash player and was national champion. He was a scholarship student. He didn't have much money. So he had to get very high grades. He didn't want to do any work. And so he figured out how to Niederhofer the curriculum of Harvard. He signed up for nothing but the toughest graduate courses in economics. And the economics students in those advanced courses were doing a lot of the scud work for the professors. So nobody ever gave them anything less than an A. And for a while, Niederhofer didn't even go to class. They thought they had a new John Maynard Keynes at Harvard. He was just signing up for courses where you couldn't get a low grade. Interesting story. Interesting man. Wiped out the second time. He's very brilliant. This is a very talented man. Pushing like that hard is a mistake. It's maybe a level mistake when you're trying to get out of the mire of mediocrity and get your head a little above the crowd. But when you're already rich, it's insane. Why would you risk what you haven't need in order to get what you don't have and don't need? Really stupid.
Good morning, Charlie. My name is Yang Lee from New York. Thank you so much for so many years of teaching by you and Warren. It has profound impact on myself and many of my friends and family. Thank you so much. I have a question about the U.S. high-speed rail system. As you know, the U.S. High-Speed Rail Act was introduced back in 1965 when Berkshire had the first annual meeting. So I'm just wondering what's your thinking or outlook or comments about this current status of the U.S. high-speed rail system, including the one that's building here in California and the possibility for national high-speed rail system. Thank you.
Well, that's a very interesting question. The high-speed rail system, which was aggressively created in China, is a huge success and very desirable. So it's not like it's intrinsically a dumb idea. However, in the conditions we actually have in America, getting a high-speed rail system is really difficult, including having one even in California. And I'm not at all sure that trying to have a high-speed rail system in California was wise, all factors considered. But I'm not sure that it isn't, on the other hand. Just put me down as skeptical, but not determinedly opposed. And I know it will cost a fortune, that I'm sure of. And the trouble with it is it's competing with something that works pretty well, called the airplane. So, I can't answer your question except as I can. I know we need a big grid. I'm not sure the United States needs a high-speed rail system for passengers. I would say that may have passed us by.
Good morning, Mr. Munger. Over here. Marcus Lane from San Diego. I thank you for doing this. I just wanted to ask, given your experience with companies like See's Candy and Portions Jewelry, could you comment on whether you ever considered investments in Hershey or Tiffany's that have done very well over the long term and offered attractive entry points? Thank you.
Well, I'd be delighted to own either Hershey's or Tiffany's at the right price, wouldn't you? It's just a question of price. Of course they're a great company. But that's not enough. You have to have big companies available at a price you're willing to pay. Hershey's is a private company. Nobody's offering me Hershey's. I can buy the candy, but I can't buy the company.
Okay, sorry. Mr. Munger, I'm here with my 92-year-old grandma, who has spent the past 50 years investing for our family. As a college senior with a passion for value investing, it keeps me up at night, knowing that I will eventually be entrusted with a portfolio she's built for a lifetime. Based on the successful decisions you've made for your large family here today, what advice do you have in regards to seizing the few opportunities when I will have to act decisively for my family without jeopardizing her life's work?
Well, of course, I like any 92-year-old person. Particularly if it's a good-looking woman who's also rich. And whose descendants admire her, instead of being eager to have her gone. I said, if you have a big winner there in your family, you try and live your life so you could be a big winner too. I'll take another.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Munger. My name is Shiwan, and I'm from Chicago. I have a question on the subject of artificial intelligence. It looks like the AI will have a much bigger impact on society than the internet revolution. So would you mind maybe share some of your thoughts on how artificial intelligence will impact different industries in general, and how it will impact the future of human race?
Well, that's a nice question. The people who study artificial intelligence don't really know the answer to that question. I'm not studying artificial intelligence because I wouldn't be able to learn much about it. I can see that artificial intelligence is working in the marketing arrangements of Facebook and Google. And so I think it is working in some places very well, but it's a very complicated subject. And what its exact consequences are going to be, I don't know. I've done so well in life just by using organized common sense that I never wanted to get into these fields like artificial intelligence. You can walk along the shores and pick up boulders and gold. As long as the boulders keep being found and picked up, I don't want to go to the placer mining, accepting vast amounts of data from some little edge. So you're just talking to the wrong person. And I'm not at all sure how great. I don't think artificial intelligence is at all sure to create an economic revolution. I'm sure we'll use more of it. But what are the consequences of using artificial intelligence to become the world's best gold miner? There may be places where it works, but we've thought about it at Geico for years and years and years. We're still using the old-fashioned intelligence. So I don't know enough about it to say more than that.
Hi, Mr. Munger. My name is Peter Berlin from Oakville, Ontario. I just wanted to have a few questions about culture. How can an outsider really know a company's culture? And for that matter, how can an insider, right at the top of an organization, really be certain about the culture that's in the company beneath him? And then finally, how do you go about assessing the culture of giants like General Electric or Fargo? What is it you look at when you understand culture? Thank you.
Well, you understand culture best town, at a place like Costco, and there the culture is a vast and constructive force. And it will probably continue for a very, very long time. And then you get into General Electric, partly decentralized, partly not, multi-business instead of one business. It gets very complicated. What is the culture of General Electric? The businesses can be so radically different. And maybe headquarters can have a certain kind of culture. And maybe the culture will be a little wrong. And maybe it's wrong to shift people around from business to business as much as they do, which I strongly suspect. And I do think there are very few businesses like Costco that have a very extreme culture that they're bought into. They stayed in one basic business all the way. I love a business like Costco because of the strong culture and how much it can be achieved if the culture is right. But the minute you get into bigger and more complicated places, I mean, you can talk about the culture of General Motors or the culture of AT&T. It's a very difficult subject. What big businesses have in common is that they get very bureaucratic. That's the one norm in culture, is they get very bureaucratic. And of course it happens in government too. Big government otherwise. And basically I don't like bureaucracy. There's a lot of error. I don't have any substitute for it. I don't have a better way of running the U.S. than the way they're doing it. But I basically don't personally like big bureaucratic culture. And so I don't think very much about big bureaucratic culture. I don't know how to fix bureaucracy in a big place. I would regard it as a sentence to hell if they gave me some company with 1 million employees that could change the culture. I think it's hard to change the culture in a restaurant. The place is already bureaucratic. How do you make it unbureaucratic? It's a very hard problem. Berkshire has solved the problem as best it can of bureaucracy. You can't have too much bureaucracy at headquarters if there are no bodies at headquarters. That's our system. And I don't think it arose because we were geniuses or anything. I think partly it was an accident. But once we saw how well it was working, we kept it. But I don't have a solution for corporate culture at monstrous places. No, they don't.
Hi, good morning, Mr. Munger. How are you doing? First off, I think this needs to be said. We love you. Thank you for coming. And thank you for being a voice of reason and a voice of a guardian. Now, my question to you is this hasn't been talked at all for a while now. The thing with climate change. What's your current view of climate change today?
Well, I am deeply skeptical of the conventional wisdom of the people who call themselves climate scientists. I strongly suspect that they're more alarmed than the facts call for, and that they kind of like the fact that they can prattle about something that's kind of alarming. I am not nearly as afraid as the typical so-called climate scientist is, and I think the difficulties of what they urge as a remedy are underestimated by these people. And besides, just because you're smart enough, suppose you, by knowing a lot of physics and so forth, could accurately figure out that climate change was a huge problem and you were right, that would not automatically mean that you know how to fix it. Fixing it would be a vast, complicated problem. Geopolitics, political science, all kinds of things that just because you understood the chemistry of climate, say, you wouldn't have any expertise as. So I think there's a hell of a lot of nonsense being traveled on the climate change thing. But no, there's no doubt about the fact that the CO2 does cause some global warming. But just because you accept that doesn't mean that the world is absolutely certainly going to hell in a handbasket. Or that the seas are going to rise by 200 feet anytime soon, and so on. So I'm deeply skeptical of a lot of these people. And yet I don't want to be identified with the know-nothings who really are vastly ignorant and wouldn't even recognize that CO2 does have some influence on temperature. Now I've tried to offend everybody, and I think that's a good.
Coach, can you hear me? How's it going, Charlie? I'm Steve Nash. I'm in from Notre Dame. And I got a kind of funny story, but if you told me 5 years ago that the posters I would have in college would be of a couple old guys, I wouldn't believe you. But I'm happy to say that I'm here, and I wake up to you and Warren every morning. So my question for you is, in an age that's very different than the one you grew up in, if you were a young gun like me with a lot of runway, like Peter talked about, where would you focus your attention?
Well, I would approach life a lot like Carlyle. I would just get up every morning and do the best I could in every way, and I'd expect over time to do pretty well. And it's not very hard. I'd try to marry the right person instead of the wrong person. Everything would be quite private. You know, I would guess that practically everybody your age in this room is going to do pretty well. You're not that mad at the world here. You're trying to figure out how to cope with it a little better. You're going to do all right. People like that succeed. But if you all came in here with placards, sure that you were right on every subject and wanted to shout back, you wouldn't have such a bright future. Those people are pounding their idiocy in instead of shouting it out.
Our national discourse has displayed some odd characteristics lately with fake news, partisanship, hype cycles with crypto and others. Which cognitive biases do you think are particularly at play on a national scale these days?
Well, it's hard with so many cockroaches in the kitchen, it's hard to identify each species. No, I would say every bias that man is prone to is always working. That's the nature of the system. And it's amazing what people have come to believe. It's amazing how polarized our parties are becoming. And now you turn on TV, and you can even turn to Channel A, and you got your kind of idiot. Or you can Channel B, and you got the other kind of idiot. Well, they haven't counted, they're both idiots. And they're playing to an audience that is mentally defective. Of course, it's a little disquieting. And I was used to a different world. You know, I like Walter Cronkite. You know, this choose your idiot form of news gathering, I don't much like. And what do you do? It's very, I flip back and forth between idiot types. I will not stay with just one type of idiot. So that's my system. But you're right. It's weird. Now, the world has always had weird idiots. Hitler was an idiot. Smart idiot, but an idiot. And we always are going to have crazy people and crazy people who follow crazy people. And part of what I like about that situation is it accentuates, gives the more incentive to think correctly yourself. And I find life works best when you are trying to stay rational all the time. And it's more, and I must say, these idiots are giving me more incentive. You know, I don't want to be like any of them. Don't you feel that way when you turn on the TV? And here's one idiot counting this way, and the other counting this way, misrepresenting the facts. I don't want to be like either of them. And so, I don't know whether we're going to have more of what's developed, or whether we're going to go back to something that's more pleasant. But it's kind of interesting to watch, I will say that.
Good morning, Mr. Munger. This is Peter. I'm from San Jose. I have a question. What do you think are the critical challenges that businesses that rely heavily on advertising as a source of revenue face in this digital age?
Yeah, I didn't quite catch that.
Yeah. So, what do you think are some of the critical challenges that business models relying quite a bit on advertising as a source of revenue will face, particularly in this digital age?
Well, if I'm following that correctly, we do live in an age where people using computer science to sift out correlations that might be predictive, and then to try trading on those algorithms on an instant basis in and out, where large amounts of money have been made by, say, Renaissance technology. And there's way more of that, and it's worked for those people. And I don't consider it a good development. I don't see any big contribution to civilization, having a lot of people using computer algorithms to outtrade other people on a short-term basis. Some people think it creates more liquidity in the markets, and therefore it's destructive. But I just as soon do without it. And I would rather make my money in some other way than short-term trading based on computer algorithms. But there is more of it. You're right about that. And by and large, the one thing they have in common is they can't take infinite amounts of money. You try and pile too much money into an algorithm, it's self-defeating. And thank God it's self-defeating.
Good morning, Mr. Munger. My name is Phil Brewster from Chicago. I was hoping to gain some insight into your and Warren's discussion regarding airlines. Whether or not it was a light bulb that went off in a certain year, or whether or not the conversation sort of morphed over time. I know that 2000 to 2013, a lot of costs were taken out of the industry, so just trying to get an idea of when you got open-minded to maybe investing in airlines, and how you changed your mind.
Well, we did change our mind. For a long time, Warren and I hated all railroads because there were too many of them and it was too competitive and union rules were too crazy. And so they were lousy investments for about 75 years. And then they finally, the world changed and they double-decked all the trains. And they got down to 4 big rail systems in the whole United States in terms of freight. All of a sudden, we liked railroads. It took about 7 years. Warren and I never looked at a railroad for like 50 years. And then we bought one. Now, the airlines, Warren used to joke about it, He'd say that investing class would have been better if the Wright brothers had never invented flight. But given the conditions that were present when that stock was purchased, and given the conditions at Berkshire Hathaway where it's drowning in money, we thought it was okay to buy a bunch of airline stock. What more can I say? Certainly it's okay to change your mind when the facts change. And to some extent the facts have changed. And to some extent they haven't. It is harder to create the local competing airlines than it was. And the industry has maybe learned something. So I hope it works better, but I don't think it's, I think the chances of just buying airlines and holding them for 100 years is going to work well. I think that's pretty low.
Yes, hello, Mark. I had a question for you. I have a question on the Daily Journal Corporation, so hopefully that's okay. The auditor's report discussed material weakness and segregated duties. I was curious if that was something you could speak on, if it's something you're fixing or not, whether or not it'd be rational or why it would be rational.
Yeah. Well, all auditors are now paid to find some kind of weakness and then fix it. And so there are very few companies that don't have some little material weakness that needs fixing. I am not that worried about the accounting of the Daily Journal. Basically, it's more conservative than other people in our industry. And basically, we're not trying to mislead anybody. And basically, we've got a couple $100 million of marketable securities, and we're not mismanaging those, they just sit there. So, I don't think we have big accounting problems with the Daily Journal. I think it's typical of the modern developments in accounting, that the accountants have gotten big and bureaucratic, and they've got new responsibilities, and they're amorphous, like weakness. Well, everybody has weakness. You, me, and I don't think there's some wonderful accounting standard where all the accountants know what's weak and what isn't, and exactly how much and how dangerous it is. So, I am not much worried about the accounting of the Daily Journal. But I think the business of everybody in America is worried about somebody hacking in and getting a lot of data. And everybody has some weakness, meaning they're all afraid of it. And they're right to be afraid of it. And we have these amorphous terms, and everybody is, I'm just doing the best we can and taking the blows as they come. What the benefits do. But I'm not worried about material weaknesses in accounting. There was a guy named B.B. Robertson, I came to Los Angeles. He'd gotten out of the pools, the stock pools of the 20s. As a young man with $10 or so million, it was a lot of money to come out here in the 30s. When he got here with all this money, he spent his time drinking heavily and chasing movie stars. And in those days, the bankers were more pompous and old-fashioned. And one of them called him in and said, Mr. Robinson, I'm terribly worried about your drinking all this whiskey and chasing all these movie stars. It's not the kind of thing our sound bank likes. Well, B.B. Robinson said to this banker, he said, listen, he said, my municipal bonds don't drink. That's basically the answer to the material weakness problem with the Daily Journal. Our lowly marketable securities aren't drinking. They're doing foolish things.
Mr. Munger.
Yeah.
Mr. Munger, I'm Clifton Shank in Santa Monica, California. I think I read that you've given the advice that if you're not willing to put the work into investigating specific stock investments, that you should perhaps put your money into passive vehicles like an index fund. One of my advisors is very concerned about the move of capital into index funds for 3 reasons that I'd like your comments on. First, he says there's an inadvertent concentration in particular stocks because of similar investments in different indexes. Second, thinks long term, the concentration of capital into preferred companies that are in the index funds detract from their ability to, that they're able to raise money easily despite poor performance. And third, is also very concerned long term with the concentration of the management of these index funds into 3 institutions, which is detrimental to the marketplace that we all believe in. appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Well, I think that a lot of people who are in the business of selling investment advice hate the fact that the indexes have been outperforming. And of course, they can't say I hate it because it's ruining my life. So they say I hate it because it's too concentrated. Well, the index contains 75% of the market capitalization. It's hardly so small. Index investing will work for quite a while when it's so broad. And so I don't think it's ruining the world or anything like that. It is peculiar, and we lived a long time without this. I think it will keep running a long time forward, and I think it'll work pretty well for a long time. And I expect most money managers just hate it. It's making their life hard. But you see, I don't mind if people having a hard life. So I'm not distressed.
Charlie, I'm good. Hi, my name is Parth Chaudhary. I'm an investor from India. I wanted to take your views. First of all, thank you so much for teaching us so much, and especially the value of humility, which I think, given your achievement both as an investor and human being, I think it's something we should all take away from. I wanted to get your views that history tends to doesn't repeat itself, but it certainly rhymes. And we're seeing this mania in Bitcoin that is often akin to the tulip mania. I often tend to see that adage over there. And I'd like to see your views how you and Warren really navigated through these waters in your several decades of investing, and what it says about the human condition that we tend to keep constantly falling for these things despite what history teaches us otherwise. Thank you.
Well, you are, of course, right to suspect that I regard the Bitcoin craze as it's totally asinine. Treat some manufactured currency. A different payment system could happen, like WeChat in China, and it's a better payment system than the one we have in America. And so something like that could happen. But Bitcoin, where they're creating an alternative to gold and an alternative to me, and then make a big speculative vehicle. To me, it's a subject. I never considered for 1 second having anything to do with it. I detested it the moment it was raised. The more popular it got, the more I hated it. On the other hand, I expect the world to do insane things from time to time. Because everybody wants easy money. And of course, the people who are peddling things and taking money off the top for promoting the investment, they like it too. And so these crazes, they keep coming and coming and coming. But who would want their children to grow up buying things like Bitcoin? I just hope to God that doesn't happen to my family. It's just disgusting that people will be taken in by something like this. It's crazy. I'm not saying that some different payment system might not be a good thing, like WeChat. That could come and be constructive. But Bitcoin is noxious poison. Partly they love it because the computer science is quite intriguing to people with mathematical things. It's quite a feat what they've done as a matter of pure computer science. But, you know, I'm sure you can get terribly good at torture if you spend a lot of time. It's not a good development. And the government of China, which is stepping on it very hard, is right, and our government's more lax approach to it is wrong. The right answer to stuff like that is to step on it hard. And it's the government's job.
So I'm Darius from Austin, and wanted to thank you for sharing a lot of your wisdom outside of investing. The one that stands out for me was at a Berkshire meeting a few years ago. You said, if all I did was trade pieces of paper, it would be a failed life.
Yeah.
That stuck on with me. But my question's a little different. In response to an earlier question, You said that a lot of your happiness comes from the partner you choose, and you've written about that before as well. So I'm curious, what are the qualities you look for in a life partner?
In a life partner?
Yeah, it's a wife.
Well, I've been quoted on that. I think what you really need in a life partner, if you're constructed the way I am, is somebody with low expectations. Well, I think it's 12 o'clock, and I think that should probably do for this group. I know you. I'm used to the groupies standing up for 2 hours. I wouldn't stand up for 2 hours to listen to Isaac Newton if he can. So I guess our meeting is adjourned. I certainly wish you all well, my kind of people.